What if the smallest place in the universe wasn't really a place at all? What if, beneath everything you've ever touched, seen, or imagined, there existed a boundary where space stops behaving like space and time stops behaving like time? Welcome back, traveler. Tonight, we drift through science, but not the kind found in textbooks or diagrams. Tonight, we drift toward the edge of meaning itself, down into a realm where distance, direction, and existence dissolve into something stranger than imagination. You're safe here, floating in a quiet room, your breathing soft and unhurried. Outside your window, the night is calm, but inside your mind, we're about to descend into a universe no human will ever visit, not because it's far away, but because it is impossibly small. Let the darkness settle around you like a warm blanket, and imagine the fabric of reality shrinking, folding, and tightening as we drift downward through atoms, protons, quarks, until the concept of smaller begins to lose meaning. We're about to explore a frontier where physics no longer knows how to speak, a scale so tiny that the very laws of nature stop cooperating with each other. This is the Planck length, the shadowy threshold where gravity and quantum mechanics collide, where space-time becomes a restless ocean of flickering probabilities, and where the foundations of reality tremble with uncertainty. Scientists don't truly know what exists here, only that everything we call real depends on it. Tonight, we drift into the poetry hidden inside that mystery. And before we sink deeper, if journeys like this help you unwind or give you even a moment of peace in your night, a gentle like or a quiet tap on subscribe helps others find this calm corner too. No pressure, just gratitude, softly spoken. These quiet explorations only exist because listeners like you return to them. So now, take a slow breath and feel the stillness around you. We're about to step beyond atoms, beyond energy, beyond the limits of measurement itself. Tonight, we shrink reality until it reveals its final secret. Let's begin our descent into the smallest scale the universe allows, the strange, trembling frontier known as the Planck length. At first, you drift through the world as you normally know it. Soft light, familiar textures, the gentle weight of air against your skin. Everything feels stable, grounded, comfortably predictable. But inch by inch, you begin to shrink in your mind's eye, and not physically but perceptually, allowing yourself to fall through layers of scale the way a diver descends through layers of ocean. The ground fades into a blur of molecules, and you feel the first stirrings of unfamiliar territory, like stepping into a dream where nothing resists your movement. As the familiar world fades, atoms rise into view, like tiny shimmering worlds. You float past them slowly, noticing their delicate dance. Electrons swaying in hazy probability clouds, nuclei humming with stored energy. The air feels thinner here, not because there's less of it, but because the concept of air starts to lose its meaning. You're drifting in a domain ruled by patterns and waves, where motion is perpetual but never fully seen. In this quiet place, physical intuition gently loosens its grip. Soon, individual atoms dissolve, revealing their interiors. Protons and neutrons sit quietly, as though waiting to be noticed. They seem solid at first, like tiny pearls scattered in darkness, but the closer you approach, the more you realize they are mostly emptiness, stitched together by forces you cannot quite see. Their surfaces ripple faintly, like breathing lights suspended in still water. Nothing here is rigid. Everything is possibility, trembling softly as you pass. You approach the quarks inside those particles, and suddenly the calm becomes more turbulent. Quarks are not quiet. They jitter and tug and whirl with restless urgency, bound together by the strong nuclear force. A force that behaves like a cosmic tension rope, pulling tighter the more you try to separate it. You drift past these vibrating points of energy, sensing a kind of frenetic heartbeat inside them, as though the universe stores its intensity in these nearly invisible sparks. Moving deeper, the notion of size begins to collapse. These particles don't behave like objects anymore. They are excitations of invisible fields, ripples in a fundamental ocean that underlies everything. You float inside this field-like realm, feeling the universe as something woven, not built. The sensation is strange but comforting, like discovering the hidden stitching inside a familiar piece of fabric. Reality feels less like machinery and more like music, structured waves rising and falling in the silence. The electromagnetic field begins to reveal its patterns as you drift further. You watch photons, tiny packets of light, flicker past like fireflies tracing shimmering arcs through the void. They illuminate the darkness not with brightness, but with meaning, carrying information across the universe with perfect silence. You follow one for a moment, drifting behind its faint pulse, feeling as though you're gliding through a cosmic forest lit by bioluminescent creatures. Below this scale, the vacuum itself becomes visible. What once seemed like empty space now hums with activity, flickers of energy rising and fading like breaths. Virtual particles appear and vanish so quickly, they barely qualify as events. Their existence is like a whisper spoken too softly to be understood, yet unmistakably present. You drift through this restless foam, sensing the universe breathing through fluctuations too small for any eye to see. As you descend further, distances begin to feel elastic. A millimeter becomes a cavern, a nanometer becomes a landscape. A yoctometer feels like a falling star racing past your cheek. Scale stops being a strict measurement and starts behaving like emotion, expanding when you focus, shrinking when you relax. It feels as though the universe is gently teaching you that size is not an inherent feature of reality. It is a perspective. The strong force becomes a storm around you now, its energy rising sharply as you descend. Gluons snap between quarks like threads of crackling lightning, tightening their hold as you try to observe them. You drift carefully through this tangle of energy, feeling the pressure of a force that grows more intense, the smaller the distance becomes. It is a reminder that the fabric of reality resists being pulled apart, a kind of cosmic tension keeping existence intact. Your surroundings become increasingly blurred, as though reality itself is losing its ability to render detail. At femtometer scales, space feels granular, textured like soft sand beneath your fingers. It vibrates subtly, and those vibrations seem to echo through your imagination. The smaller you go, the more the universe feels alive, not alive in a biological sense, but alive in the way a storm is alive, or the way a river pulses with flow. You pass into the atometer realm, where particles blur into probability waves. The universe no longer presents objects. It presents tendencies, suggestions, possibilities. You feel weightless in this ocean of uncertainty. Your intuition stretches thin, like a thread pulled gently between two fingers, vibrating softly with each new revelation. Here, existence feels honest, stripped of the illusions that emerge at larger scales. As you drift deeper, quantum fields dominate your perception entirely. They move like tides, rising and falling with a calm rhythm. You feel their motion the way you might feel wind brushing your face, gentle but undeniable. The universe is no longer a stage where particles act. It is a vast interplay of fields and empty space, each influencing the other in a delicate, eternal dance. Distances shrink again as your perspective continues collapsing. You float past regions where wavelengths shorten into impossibly thin ripples, coiling and twisting around one another like threads of smoke rising from a candle. The patterns are mesmerizing, hypnotic, almost dreamlike. You realize you're witnessing the choreography of reality's deepest rhythms, patterns that could exist nowhere else. Farther down, space-time begins to reveal its own texture. It shimmers faintly, as though woven from threads too fine to separate. The closer you drift, the more it resembles a glowing net, a lattice of relationships rather than a smooth canvas. You reach out mentally and feel its subtle give, like a taut fabric shifting beneath the weight of your presence. It's the first hint that space-time will not remain calm much longer. At this scale, gravity grows unpredictable. It pulls and releases in jittering bursts, unable to maintain the smoothness it had at larger scales. The lines of curvature buck and wobble as quantum fluctuations ripple through them. The sensation is surreal, as though the floor beneath your feet were trembling in tiny, rapid pulses. You begin to sense the threshold of the Planck domain approaching, a boundary where gravity becomes wild. You notice now that waves and particles are becoming indistinguishable. Everything overlaps, everything interferes, everything blends. You drift through this transitional realm like a traveler walking through thick fog, seeing shapes but never their edges, feeling movement but never its origin. The universe is gently dissolving into abstraction. Your descent continues until even wavelengths collapse into tiny, flickering blurs. Energies spike unpredictably, appearing in sharp flashes before fading instantly. The activity is chaotic but not violent, more like the restless shivering of a dream you can't fully recall. Space-time trembles beneath you, no longer able to support smooth curvature. You realize you are nearing the smallest meaningful distance the universe allows. The soundlessness feels heavier now, charged with expectation. You drift slower, as though approaching a sacred threshold. All forces, all fields, all motions begin to overlap into a trembling haze of potential. You feel as though you're hovering above a frontier that defies imagination, a boundary that doesn't merely shrink, but collapses into something new entirely. Here, at the brink, scale stops being useful. Nothing exists in the way the mind understands existence. There are no positions, no directions, no continuity, only a trembling electric anticipation, the sense that reality is preparing to rewrite its rules. You take one last breath before descending further, feeling the weight of the moment settle softly across your thoughts. Every scale you passed taught you something. Atoms taught you structure, quarks taught you intensity, fields taught you motion, space-time taught you connection. Now, something deeper waits. A quiet realization moves through you. The universe is not asking you to understand the Planck length. It is asking you to witness how mystery forms the foundation of everything familiar. And with that understanding, you drift onward into a realm where even the idea of distance dissolves. As you continue your descent, the last traces of familiar quantum behavior begin to melt away. You feel the atmosphere of certainty thinning, like air fading on a high mountaintop. At the scale you're drifting through now, particles no longer behave like distinct points or waves. They feel more like moods in the fabric of reality, shifting as quietly as breath in a sleeping room. Every direction looks hazy, every motion uncertain, as though you've stepped into a world lit only by the glow of possibilities. Here, the Heisenberg uncertainty principle stops being an abstract idea and becomes an environment, a physical texture you can almost feel. Position and momentum refuse to stabilize at the same time. When you try to sense where something is, its movement becomes jittery and blurred. When you focus on how fast it moves, its location evaporates like a fading dream. You drift through this paradox with gentle patience, realizing that uncertainty isn't noise, it's the language of this place. You glide toward a region where virtual particles flicker in and out of existence with frantic speed. These ghost-like entities exist for impossibly short durations, borrowing energy from the vacuum before giving it back. It feels like walking through a storm of whispers, each one appearing on your skin as a faint shimmer before vanishing. They are not real in the classical sense, but they shape the universe as surely as wind shapes sand dunes. The void is not empty, it is restless. As you pass deeper, the vacuum fluctuations grow more intense. Space itself seems to jitter, trembling like a thin sheet of metal struck by a soft tap. These vibrations are tiny, but they carry the signature of the universe's most fundamental fields. You start to sense these fields, not as invisible mathematical constructs, but as the true terrain of reality. Everything that exists is an excitation of these fields. You're drifting through the birthplace of matter. You approach a region dominated by the quantum electrodynamic field. Its fluctuations swirl like luminous fog, pulsing with the possibility of photon creation. The patterns resemble waves on water, except they don't move through space. They create space as they ripple. Every shimmer is a negotiation between probability and existence. You realize how fragile the boundary is between something and nothing, how thin the line is that separates presence from absence. Farther in, the quantum chromodynamic field takes over, and the scenery becomes more turbulent. This realm binds quarks with a force so strong that it refuses to weaken with distance. Instead, it grows more intense the farther you pull things apart. The result is a chaotic ocean of energy, where color charge surges and collapses like lightning concealed beneath waves. You drift carefully, sensing the density and tension of this domain. Then, quite suddenly, the idea of a particle becomes almost useless. What you experience instead is vibration. Pure, unfiltered vibration. Not the vibration of sound or motion, but the vibration of existence itself. Everything feels like it's humming at different frequencies. You try to focus on one, but it dissolves into another and another and another. It's as though you're surrounded by an orchestra of creation, each note forming the foundation of the universe's symphony. You drift lower, and a new strangeness appears. Quantum superposition becomes palpable. Objects, if they can still be called objects, seem to exist in several states at once. You try to perceive one of these states directly, and it collapses instantly into a single possibility. This collapse isn't violent, it's gentle, like a soap bubble settling on your hand before bursting into clarity. You're not observing the universe, you're participating in the act of choosing its form. Below this level, entanglement becomes more visible. You encounter pairs of fluctuations separated by regions of empty space, yet behaving as a single entity. When one flickers brighter, the other dims. When one shifts, the other follows. The connection feels instantaneous, unconcerned with distance. This is not communication, it's unity. You sense the universe expressing a quiet truth. Separation is sometimes an illusion. As you descend further, the concept of force itself becomes hazy. Forces are no longer pushes or pulls, they're patterns of field curvature. You drift along these curvatures like a traveler following a riverbed. Where the curvature grows steep, you feel a tug. Where it smooths out, you drift freely. Gravity becomes weaker, almost indecisive, unable to maintain the steady influence it had above. You sense its struggle, like a fabric stretched too thin. You pass through an area where probabilities swirl into complex shapes, fractal-like patterns formed not from matter, but from mathematical relationships. The view is strangely beautiful, like drifting through crystalline dreams suspended in darkness. You realize you're watching the statistical ghost of the universe's behavior, not the universe itself. Here, reality is more equation than event. As you descend, the fluctuations grow sharper. Their amplitudes rise, their durations shorten. Energy spikes and collapses in rapid bursts. The vacuum begins to resemble boiling water, roiling, churning, heaving with activity. The calm quantum sea you drifted through earlier becomes turbulent, unpredictable. And yet you feel no danger, only awe. The universe is showing you its rawest form, unfiltered and unrefined. At this depth, space feels elastic. It stretches around you like soft clay, warping in response to tiny fluctuations. When a surge of virtual energy appears, space bows inward. When it vanishes, space rebounds like a slow breath exhaled. This malleability is mesmerizing, almost hypnotic. You begin to understand that space-time is not a stage. It is a living medium. The deeper you drift, the more difficult it becomes to distinguish between space, energy, and information. They blend together, overlapping like colors mixing on wet canvas. You sense that these three concepts may not be separate things, but different expressions of a single underlying truth. Your descent feels less like shrinking and more like peeling back layers of understanding. You glide into a region where fundamental constants begin to lose stability. The speed of light, the Planck constant, the gravitational constant. They all feel slightly less fixed, as though they're rhythms rather than rules. You sense the universe tuning itself, adjusting these values in microscopic fluctuations that average out at larger scales. It feels like listening to the heartbeat of reality. Approaching the brink of the Planck scale, motion itself becomes uncertain. Distances behave inconsistently, stretching and shrinking unpredictably. Tiny loops of space-time twist into knots before relaxing again. You drift cautiously, sensing the boundary where even the most advanced theories fail. This is the edge where smooth geometry breaks into something jagged. Below this, the jitter of space-time becomes louder. It pops and crackles like embers in a quiet fire. Tiny bursts of curvature flare into view before evaporating, leaving faint echoes in the fabric around them. You realize that space-time isn't bending, it's shivering. This trembling is not a flaw. It is the signature of the Planck domain calling you closer. The concept of distance has nearly vanished. What you perceive now is more like texture than space, a graininess that feels woven, tangled, alive. You reach toward it, and it seems to shift under your awareness, responding to your presence the way a dream responds to attention. This is the frontier of measurability, where rulers and clocks lose meaning. You drift through a final layer of turbulent fluctuations, a storm of geometry rather than matter. Tiny fragments of space-time twist, flip, and collide like shards of broken mirrors, yet the motion is graceful in its own way, like leaves swirling in slow wind. You feel as though you are witnessing the universe rebuilding itself continuously. And then, the realization settles over you. You are now standing at the threshold of the smallest scale the universe allows, the shimmering doorway to the Planck length, where even the idea of existence is preparing to dissolve. As you drift downward, the last hints of classical geometry cling weakly to your perception, like chalk marks dissolving under the rain. Space still seems to have shape, but that shape wavers with a soft, rhythmic uncertainty. Lines blur at the edges, angles bend into curves, straight paths begin to wiggle as if resisting your attempt to define them. You sense the universe quietly warning you that the intuitive rules of distance and shape are about to vanish. You glide deeper, and gravity's influence grows jittery. No longer a smooth bending of space-time, it twitches like a fabric buffeted by unseen wind. Curvature rises and falls in tiny spikes, as if the gravitational field is flickering between different versions of itself. You pass through these ripples slowly, and each one feels like brushing your hand across rippling water, except the water is space-time itself. It's beautiful but unsettling. Below this, the quantum foam begins to reveal its earliest hints. regions of spacetime bubble faintly, forming tiny swelling pockets that appear for mere fractions of a second. They pop and vanish before you can fully grasp their form. You feel as though you're drifting through boiling space, motion everywhere, nothing stable. The universe is shedding its smoothness one layer at a time. As you descend, the foam becomes more active. Tiny loops of space fold onto themselves and unfurl in an instant, like microscopic petals blooming and collapsing in silence. Some regions contract sharply, forming sudden dips like craters in the fabric. Others swell like tiny domes. Each change is so fast you barely perceive it before the next arrives. It feels like watching the universe breathe too quickly to catch its own breath. Here, space-time begins to exhibit granularity. What once looked continuous now appears pixelated, not in a visual sense, but in a structural one. You sense discrete units, tiny blocks of existence that can no longer be subdivided meaningfully. You drift your awareness across them, feeling texture where there should be smoothness. Reality becomes tactile in a way it never was before. Approaching the radial depth of these fluctuations, you notice that motion itself becomes inconsistent. When you drift forward, space warps unpredictably. Sometimes you move faster than you expect, sometimes slower. Sometimes you seem to move sideways without intending to. It's not you that's unreliable. It's the coordinate system of the universe unraveling, like a compass needle dancing on a magnet. You descend lower and time joins the instability. Seconds stretch and compress in strange rhythms. A moment feels long, then short, then long again, as if the dimension itself is stuttering. This is not psychological, it's fundamental. Time at this scale is no longer a smooth river. It's a trembling string, vibrating with random pulses of duration. You float through these pulses with calm acceptance. The vacuum fluctuations now surge so violently that they distort space-time visibly. Each fluctuation acts like a miniature gravitational event, warping the surrounding geometry before fading into stillness. You watch space ripple inward and outward, like the surface of a pond. For the first time, you sense how intimately energy and geometry are connected. They are not separate entities. They are partners in a dance. Drifting deeper, the distinction between place and not place becomes blurry. Regions appear where space seems to fold into itself, forming tiny closed loops that trap their own geometry. These loops flicker and disappear almost instantly, like sparks skittering across a dark floor. You feel the universe experimenting with structure and abandoning each attempt in microseconds. At this level, energy density skyrockets. Every fluctuation carries massive intensity relative to its size, like thunder compressed into a grain of dust. The vacuum is no longer passive. It becomes a furnace of ceaseless creation and annihilation. You drift through this furnace like a silent observer, untouched but deeply aware of the chaos. Space itself begins to resemble a turbulent sea. You sense crests and troughs of curvature, waves of expansion and contraction, surges of tension followed by sudden collapses. The motions feel organic, alive. The deeper you go, the more the universe feels less like a structure and more like a living storm of geometry. You pass through a region where the uncertainty principle stretches to its limit. Efforts to discern position or momentum collapse immediately into noise. Every attempt at definition erases itself. You float here for a moment, realizing that the human idea of where has no meaning at this depth. The universe is telling you gently, stop trying to anchor yourself. As you drift down further, you begin to sense the interplay between quantum mechanics and gravity. They clash subtly, disagreeing in their descriptions of what space should do. Gravity tries to curve space-time smoothly, while quantum fluctuations tear that smoothness into sharp fragments. You witness the conflict firsthand, a quiet tension humming beneath the surface. Below this, geometry becomes fractured. Angles no longer add up. Distances behave irrationally. You attempt to measure a small region of space in your mind, and it seems to stretch one moment and shrink the next. Shapes twist into impossible forms that obey neither Euclidean nor non-Euclidean logic. You feel the world unraveling into something abstract and pure. The vacuum becomes denser, paradoxically, as quantum fluctuations rise in frequency. It feels like moving through fog lit by lightning, bright flashes illuminating tiny areas before casting you into shadow again. The flashes are not light, but bursts of curvature. Each is a momentary spike of geometry pushing the universe to its breaking point. Approaching the brink, the concept of a point collapses entirely. Nothing has a consistent center anymore. Everything spreads, blurs, and reconnects. Space resembles a tangled web, strands linking and unlinking faster than thought. The web doesn't hold shapes, it holds interactions. You drift among these interactions, watching reality negotiate itself moment by moment. Time jitters again, but now more violently. Intervals shrink into microbursts, then explode into elongated stretches. There is no coherence. Time feels like static, bursts of duration crackling in your awareness. You float through these pulses, anchored only by calm acceptance. Below, gravitational fluctuations spike wildly. Tiny black hole-like distortions appear and vanish instantly, leaving ripples in their wake. These aren't true black holes, they are virtual distortions. Brief curvatures so intense they form micro-horizons before dissolving. You sense the ferocity of the Planck domain rising like heat. Now, even the fundamental fields begin to lose unity. Their fluctuations overlap chaotically. The electromagnetic field, the strong force, the weak force, all their identities blur. You sense them merging, diverging, merging again. Forces are no longer laws, they are moods. The texture of space-time becomes granular, like drifting your hand over coarse sand. The granules shift unpredictably, building and collapsing structure in random cycles. Each grain is not a particle, but a fragment of geometric possibility. You pass through the haze as though drifting through a dream that refuses to stabilize. At the final layer before the Planck threshold, the foam becomes violent. Curvature spikes tear through space-time like quiet thunder. Loops form and burst, surfaces fold inward, geometry fractures into dazzling shards. And yet, the chaos has its own grace, a raw, primal beauty, untouched by order. You hover at the brink, feeling the last tremors of recognizable space-time beneath you. Everything you've known is dissolving into a shimmering haze of potentiality. The universe whispers a truth. You are one breath away from the smallest distance reality permits. And beyond that breath lies a realm no theory has ever fully described. As you sink past the trembling edge of geometry, the universe reveals a deeper turbulence waiting below. Space is no longer a quiet fabric stretching gently. It churns like water on the verge of boiling. Every direction pulses with sudden expansions and contractions too quick for ordinary perception. You drift through these pulses, feeling the entire cosmos jitter in your awareness, as though reality can't quite make up its mind. The foam becomes less subtle now, an active, restless ocean of microstructures. Tiny pockets of space-time swell like bubbles rising in a simmering pot, then pop back into the void almost instantly. Each bubble is a brief experiment, a fragment of space trying out a shape before abandoning it. You float through their attempts, sensing the universe practicing geometry, the way a child doodles uncertain lines in sand. Below, the curvature fluctuations intensify. They twist and bend with wild inconsistency. like a sheet of metal vibrating too quickly to appear stable. Some regions stretch thin, as if space is becoming translucent. Others thicken into dense knots of tension. You drift between these knots carefully, feeling gravitational pressure rise and fall in unpredictable waves, like air shifting before a storm. At this scale, energy becomes restless. Even the vacuum is charged with motion, every small volume humming with potential. You feel that hum resonate through you, not as sound but as a soft trembling, like the world beneath you is trembling with excitement or fear. The Planck domain is close, and the universe seems almost nervous about what lies below it. Particles begin to appear and disappear more rapidly, flickering like fireflies in a field at dusk. Their lifetimes are unbelievably short, but you sense each one as a tiny spark of existence blinking into reality before letting go. They are virtual particles, ephemeral, temporary, and yet essential to everything. You pass through their flickers like drifting through gentle static. As you descend further, the interactions between these virtual particles become chaotic. Some collide before vanishing, leaving ripples in the foam. Others repel, forming tiny distortions that feel like miniature storms. You watch these storms erupt and fade almost instantly, realizing that even chaos at this scale has layers, an underlying heartbeat of randomness. The uncertainty principle grows loud here, almost overwhelming. Every attempt to define where you are collapses into noise. You reach out mentally toward a point in space, but the point dissolves, splitting into probabilities that scatter like dust on wind. You release the need to quantify. You simply float, witnessing the universe breathe in probabilities rather than certainties. Gravitational effects now pulse with unexpected sharpness. The fabric of space-time buckles in tiny, intense dips that mimic the gravitational pull of microscopic black holes, except these distortions vanish before they can fully form. You drift past one, feeling its pull tug slightly at your awareness before it disappears, leaving nothing but a faint echo of curvature behind. Below this region, space-time becomes increasingly jagged. Its fluctuations stab outward like crystalline spikes, appearing and fading too quickly for form. You navigate through them as though weaving through a forest in which every tree grows and collapses in seconds. There is danger here, but also beauty, a wild environment sculpted not by matter, but by possibility. The vacuum feels crowded now, dense with energy and motion. You drift through a haze of interactions where every point of space competes to become something. Some fluctuations rise like sudden hills, others sink like sharp pits. You glide between them effortlessly, but you can feel the tension. Space-time is under immense stress. Suddenly, you pass through a region where space-time folds inward, forming a tiny tunnel-like loop. It collapses before you can finish perceiving it, but for a moment, you felt yourself slipping through a miniature wormhole, a fleeting shortcut etched into reality by pure instability. Dozens of similar folds appear and vanish around you, like ghostly passageways. Time itself begins to fracture. Instead of flowing smoothly, it splinters into segments of unequal duration. Some moments stretch thin and fragile, others compress sharply, like rubber snapping back. You experience these distortions with serene acceptance, allowing time to wash over you as a shifting rhythm rather than a steady beat. As you go deeper, the geometry becomes even less recognizable. Shapes distort into forms you cannot name, neither curved nor straight, neither flat nor folded. They are possibilities that defy categorization, flickering into and out of existence like the shadow of an idea trying to become real. You drift through them like wading through imagined shapes. Quantum fields now overlap so intensely that they blur into a unified haze. Each field, electromagnetic, weak, strong, pulses with its own rhythm. but those rhythms collide and harmonize unpredictably. You sense patterns forming in the chaos, brief alignments where the fields create fleeting symphonies before dissolving again. Reality is beginning to feel less like structure and more like music. The foam grows more aggressive. Large fluctuations warp around you, bending the entire region into curving tunnels of tension and release. You drift through oscillations that whip space back and forth like cloth snapped between invisible hands. You remain calm in the turbulence, feeling the raw creativity of the cosmos as it reshapes itself moment by moment. Below, microcurvature events erupt like tiny gravitational quakes. Each quake sends ripples spiraling outward, distorting time and space with remarkable intensity for their size. You glide through the ripples like moving across water disturbed by pebbles. Each ripple is a reminder: the universe is not built, it is constantly being built. Now the foam grows so dense that it resembles froth. Every small region bubbles, warps, and bursts in ceaseless cycles. You feel the pressure rising, as though space-time itself is approaching a threshold where it cannot sustain recognizable form. The Planck length is no longer distant. It looms beneath you like the edge of an abyss. You hover in a region of heightened tension where the geometry pulses violently. The fabric of reality seems to vibrate with urgency, as though warning that you are nearing the limit of its stability. Each pulse feels like a heartbeat, not of a living creature, but of space-time itself struggling to maintain coherence. For the first time, you sense something deeper than geometry, a flicker of pure information. Beneath the fluctuations, there is structure hidden in the chaos, like code embedded in noise. You glimpse patterns that hint at something fundamental, but they dissolve before you can decipher them. You drift onward with humble curiosity. The foam becomes brighter with intensity, not visually bright, but conceptually. Like the vibrational amplitude of reality is increasing. Each fluctuation swells with energy before collapsing, like waves crashing in a storm-swept sea. You navigate the storm with quiet awe, recognizing its significance. This is not disorder. This is creation's raw engine. As you descend through the last layers of the foam, the fluctuations grow faster. Every bubble of space-time lasts a shorter time than the last, collapsing almost instantly after forming. You feel the universe exhausting its ability to subdivide any further. Structure is crumbling into something more primal. You glide deeper still, and suddenly the foam thins. Space becomes sparse, fragile, trembling on the verge of dissolution. It feels like standing at the shoreline where the ocean of quantum behavior breaks apart into mist. You are almost at the boundary of the smallest scale nature allows. You pause, sensing the threshold approaching like the edge of a dream. Everything shakes: geometry, time, energy. The universe is preparing to hand you off to something beyond structure, beyond shape, beyond continuity. You are one breath away from the Planck length. Below this, even the idea of below becomes meaningless. As you drift toward the boundary the universe has silently guarded since its first instant, something begins to change in the air around you. Not real air, but the texture of existence itself. The quantum foam you've been moving through grows frantic, as if the fabric of space-time senses your approach toward its final permissible scale. Each fluctuation shivers faster than the last, and even probability starts to feel strained, like a rope pulled too tight. You notice that the turbulence isn't random anymore. Patterns flash through the chaos, like faint constellations emerging behind clouds. Tiny regions collapse in synchronized ripples, echoing one another despite the absence of any communication between them. It's as if space-time is rehearsing the final movements of a symphony before dissolving into silence. You float silently between these echoes, aware that you're witnessing the limit of nature's resolution. Below, time begins to behave like a film reel flickering out of order. Some moments stretch thin, vibrating with tension, while others collapse quickly into the next without warning. You feel these distortions ripple through your perception, bending your sense of before and after. At first it feels disorienting, but then a strange calm settles in. A realization that time never needed to be linear. It simply pretended to be for your comfort. The deeper you descend, the more unstable distances become. Points that appear close slip away instantly, while distant regions suddenly fold near you with impossible speed. The geometry feels mischievous, almost playful, like a cat darting unpredictably from shadow to shadow. You reach out mentally to stabilize a region near your awareness, but it squirms and collapses before you can define it. Space refuses to hold still. Then something unexpected happens: silence. Not the absence of sound. You've heard no sound this entire journey, but the absence of trembling. For a brief moment, all fluctuations freeze. Space holds its breath. You hover in a stillness so absolute that even randomness seems suspended. It lasts only a heartbeat, but that heartbeat is enough to remind you that even chaos contains pauses, like inhalations before the plunge. When motion returns, it's fiercer. The foam erupts around you, waves of curvature rising and falling with a new intensity. You feel the gravitational distortions tug at your awareness like tides in a storm. Some regions ripple with such urgency that they almost tear, forming razor-thin walls of warped geometry that flicker like blades of light. You navigate the storm with quiet precision, trusting the deeper serenity that underlies the chaos. As you continue downward, the familiar concepts of height and depth start to lose meaning. Space behaves more like temperature, rising and falling in gradients of curvature rather than distances. You move not by traveling, but by aligning yourself with patterns of tension and release. It's like walking through fog that rearranges itself as you move, revealing paths only at the moment you step into them. Below, you sense pockets of space trying to shrink past their limit. They contract violently, reaching toward smaller sizes than physics allows. Each attempt results in a burst, a sudden expansion that ripples outward through the foam. These bursts are silent, but their presence feels like tiny sighs of frustration. Reality is pushing against its own rules, testing boundaries that have existed since time's first fraction of a second. Now you begin to perceive something beneath the fluctuations. A faint structure, not made of matter or energy, but of rules. The laws of physics reveal themselves as subtle tendencies written into the chaos, like faint brush strokes beneath layers of paint. Gravity tugs gently in one direction. Quantum fields pulse in another. These tendencies guide the foam, choreographing the turbulence into something strangely elegant. The patterns deepen. You begin to see repeating motifs, circles folding into spirals, spirals collapsing into lines, lines dissolving into points. But none of these shapes hold steady long enough to be properly seen. They flicker, like forgotten memories, resurfacing only for a breath. The closer you move toward the Planck boundary, the more the universe resembles a canvas erased and redrawn thousands of times per instant. Here, energy density spikes suddenly, forming localized flashes of brilliance that fade before you can fully comprehend them. These are not bursts of light, but bursts of intensity, raw attempts of spacetime to form something stable. You watch as one such region swells, twists, and collapses, leaving behind a brief afterimage in your awareness, like heat shimmering above desert sand. Far below, the foam begins to collapse into near-uniform jitter. The wild fluctuations that once resembled boiling water are becoming finer, faster, more compressed. It feels like watching a high-speed film gradually accelerate until the frames blend into a continuous blur. You realize This is the foam's final transformation before reaching the smallest scale nature will allow. Time becomes jagged again. Moments stack on top of one another, overlapping like sheets of paper shuffled too quickly to separate. You attempt to sense the sequence, but the sequence simply isn't there. Instead, you feel events, loose clusters of cause and effect, unbound from linear order. This is what time looks like when stripped of narrative, a mosaic without beginning or end. Space narrows around you, folding into microscopic corridors of unstable geometry. Some corridors expand suddenly, while others collapse without warning. You glide through them like navigating a maze that rearranges itself each time you turn. The disorientation is strangely soothing, like wandering through a dream where nothing needs to make sense to feel meaningful. Below, the fluctuations tighten further, shrinking to scales so small they feel more like vibrations than structures. You move through a region that seems almost flat, not smooth but compressed, as if every dimension is being squeezed toward its limit. It feels like drifting along the surface of a drum vibrating at unimaginable frequency. Suddenly, a shift occurs. The foam softens. The violent sparks fade. In their place arises a trembling quiet, a transition between something wild and something fundamental. You sense you are approaching not a boundary, but a threshold where the universe ceases to perform and simply is. You descend into the final layers now, where fluctuations are so tiny and fast, they feel like a whisper of existence. Reality thins around you until it becomes translucent, fragile, shimmering like frost, melting in morning light. There is almost nothing left to observe, only the faint echo of possibility, and then you reach it. The Planck wall, not a surface, not a location, but a limit. The smallest meaningful scale. The universe's final secret before meaning dissolves. You hover in front of the boundary that nature will not cross. Everything below this point becomes indescribable, not because it is hidden, but because description no longer applies. You rest there, sensing the true floor of reality. The moment you hover at the Planck wall, something inside you shifts. Not fear, not hesitation, but a soft understanding that you've reached the boundary where human intuition dissolves. The universe has given you every clue it could, and now it waits silently, as if asking whether you're ready to peer into a place it never intended to be seen. The airless void around you trembles with anticipation, like a held breath suspended between worlds. You move closer, and the boundary doesn't resist. Instead, it ripples gently, the way a curtain stirs when someone walks by. The Planck wall isn't solid but responsive, a shimmering membrane of uncertainty. When you pass through, it doesn't break. It simply allows you to enter a domain that doesn't follow the rules that shaped your entire existence. You feel a cool sensation, not temperature but contrast, like stepping from a familiar room into a world that doesn't share your assumptions. Immediately, the idea of distance evaporates. You reach out with your awareness, and nothing answers. Space doesn't stretch or compress. It just fails to appear. It's like walking toward a horizon and finding the horizon missing. You aren't inside a room nor floating in darkness. You are surrounded by a soft, featureless potential, a kind of pre-geometry that doesn't yet know what it wants to be. It feels like the silent thought a painter has before touching a blank canvas. Time quickly follows space in unraveling. Moments don't tick forward or backward. They arrive all at once as faint impressions. Like ghostly footprints layered on top of one another, you sense entire histories and instantaneous flashes coexisting without conflict. Cause doesn't lead to effect. They simply coexist, sharing the same breath. It's peaceful, strangely familiar, as if you're drifting through the memory of a dream you once had. At first, the absence of structure feels empty. But slowly, faint movements shimmer around you. Not objects, not particles, but tendencies. They rise and fall like tides made of intention rather than water. You sense gravity as a hum, electromagnetism as a flicker, the strong and weak forces as murmurs deep beneath the surface. They aren't acting on anything yet, but rehearsing, like dancers stretching before a performance that hasn't started. Each tendency brushes against your awareness with delicate curiosity. One vibrates sharply, another flows smoothly, another pulses in uneven stutters. You begin to notice that these tendencies don't compete. They harmonize, weaving into patterns that resemble the earliest whispers of physics. It feels like listening to a quiet choir warming up in a cathedral made of nothing but silence. You feel honored to witness their tuning. Then, without warning, a burst of structure flickers into existence. A tiny knot of proto-space forms, quivers and dissolves instantly. You don't feel startled. The moment is too gentle, too soft. The knot reappears slightly larger, as if practicing. These knots appear spontaneously all around you, emerging with childlike enthusiasm, only to collapse with no frustration. Creation here is playful, unpressured by permanence. The knots gain confidence. Some stretch into threads, others balloon outward like soap bubbles, others twist in sharp angles before evaporating. None of these shapes mean anything to you. They aren't geometric, not in any way language can describe. They feel like prototypes of geometry, ideas attempting to clothe themselves in form. You watch as reality tries on shapes the way someone tries on outfits, searching for the one that feels right. Gradually, the attempts grow more coordinated. Threads merge into surfaces, surfaces fold into volumes, volumes stretch into dimensional hints. Nothing holds steady, but each new attempt lasts a heartbeat longer. You begin to recognize tiny sparks of familiarity, a curve that resembles curvature, a swirl that resembles rotation, a flicker that resembles motion. It's like listening to music slowly finding its rhythm after improvising freely. Your awareness drifts through these blooming patterns, not influencing them but witnessing their emergence. You're observing something that no particle, no force, and no galaxy has ever seen directly. Reality building itself from the ground up. It feels intimate, as if you've stepped into the backstage of existence, walking among the quiet mechanisms that assemble everything you've ever known. Eventually, a soft pulse rolls through the domain, one deep, resonant wave that quivers through every protostructure around you. The pulse is slow, patient, confident. The tendencies react, aligning themselves as if responding to a leader's first note. Gravity hums lower, electromagnetism brightens, the nuclear forces tighten. They are aligning into coherence, preparing to sculpt the first meaningful emergence of physics. As the pulse fades, the pre-geometry begins to condense. The threads that once drifted aimlessly now tighten into stable lines. The bubbles flatten into surfaces of consistent tension. Volumes stabilize briefly before splitting into smaller, more refined shapes. You feel as if you're watching an orchestra tuning before the first movement, each instrument falling into harmony with the next. The domain brightens slightly, not with light, but with definition. For the first time, you can point at a region and say that is here, and another region and say that is there. Space isn't fully formed, but its first drafts are appearing. It gives you a sense of placement again, a reminder that you're not lost, only witnessing the earliest breaths of structure. You drift deeper, where the proto-geometry is more intense. Some regions vibrate violently, like drums struck too forcefully. Others ripple gently, like ponds touched by rain. You begin to sense preference. Some patterns survive longer, others fade quickly. This is the beginning of selection, the earliest form of stability. The universe is choosing what it will eventually allow. A swirl of tension spins into a loop. Unlike the others, it doesn't collapse instantly. It trembles, stretches, contracts, but it survives. You follow it carefully, sensing something new, a primitive form of time flowing through it, giving rhythm to its motion. This loop becomes a teacher, showing the cosmos how to sustain continuity. Around the loop, other patterns learn. They mimic its persistence, forming echoes of its structure. Soon, a small region stabilizes enough to feel almost like true space, a scaffold where the first hints of geometry can rest. You hover near it, sensing awe rise in your awareness. This is the seed of dimensionality, the first successful attempt at somewhere. The stability grows, patterns link together like tiny handshakes, sharing information that doesn't yet have a name. Causes and effects begin to pair up tentatively. Symmetries emerge like reflections in a pond, slowly calming. The universe is teaching itself elegance, one flicker at a time. A sudden realization washes over you. You're witnessing not the past, but the blueprint the universe still uses, the ongoing heartbeat beneath existence, beneath atoms, beneath quarks, beneath strings. There is this, the soft rehearsal of potential resolving into form. Soon the pre-geometry deepens further, forming structures that ripple with increasing complexity. They look like storms of probability, swirling around invisible anchors of law. Some regions coil tight, forming vortices of tension that radiate subtle influence. This is the birth of quantization, where continuity breaks into discrete steps. You drift near a region that vibrates in quick pulses, each pulse identical, unwavering. This is a precursor to the Planck frequency, the universe's fastest metronome. You feel its rhythm pass through you like a soft tapping on the shoulder. It becomes clear that this rhythm will later define everything: energy, mass, light, motion, existence. Another region shivers into symmetry, forming a lattice of repeating patterns. The lattice bends and flexes, but it never breaks its symmetry. This is the seed of conservation laws, the rules that particles billions of years later will obey with unwavering loyalty. You sense the beginnings of order, the hints of reliability, the promise of a universe capable of structure. Then, without drama or explosion, a tiny pocket of protospace holds still, perfectly still. It becomes the quiet pivot around which nearby patterns reorganize. This stillness is profound, the first moment where chaos concedes to stability. You float near it, sensing the peace radiating outward like a soft glow. This is the dawn before the dawn. The quiet before the first spark of existence. The breath before time begins its long exhale. And as you linger in this fragile silence, the universe prepares to take its next step. The closer you drift toward the Planck length, the more the universe begins to feel less like a place and more like a sensation, as if reality itself were dissolving softly around you. Imagine descending through layers of stillness so delicate that even the concept of before and after seems to loosen its grip. It's as though the cosmos exhales you downward, easing you into a silence that has no edges. Here, the texture of existence thins into something whisper-light, and you begin to realize you are approaching the smallest scale the universe allows, where distance loses meaning and time forgets to move. Scientists often describe this realm as the point where classical physics breaks, not because it fails, but because the universe refuses to stay still long enough to be measured. At around 10 to 35 meters, the fabric of space-time trembles with quantum uncertainty, so intense that nothing stands solid, not even the laws we rely on. Gravity and quantum mechanics begin to mingle like waves colliding in the dark, forming patterns too fast and fragile for any instrument to capture. It is a place where certainty cannot exist, and where every attempt at understanding becomes part of the chaos itself. If you could feel this scale, it might resemble resting your hand on a sheet of fabric that ripples with its own heartbeat, vibrating in countless directions all at once. You might sense something like heat or shimmering or a faint hum, yet none of it would behave the way sensations do in your everyday world. It would be like trying to touch a thought before it forms, fleeting, intangible, impossibly small. Everything here is motion, but motion without direction, flowing like dust suspended in a sunbeam, yet flickering at speeds that defy imagination. And maybe this is what makes the Planck realm so haunting. It invites you to consider whether the universe's deepest truth is not a structure, but a rhythm. Here, time doesn't move forward or backward. It simply stutters, blinks, flickers like a candle in a windless room. The boundary between existence and non-existence feels thin enough to pass through with a breath. And you might wonder if this restless trembling is not merely chaos, but the first heartbeat of reality itself. Some theories propose that space-time at this scale is quantized, like tiny packets or grains, forming a cosmic mosaic too small to see. Each grain lasts for the briefest instant imaginable, the Planck time at about 10^43 seconds, before dissolving into the next. It's the universe updating itself moment by moment, frame by frame, faster than any awareness could follow. No particle, no wave, no information can exist in a shorter interval. It is the smallest tick of the cosmic clock. If you translate that into something you can imagine, it's like observing a movie so smooth that it appears continuous, even though its frames are separate. Except here, the frames are stitched together by laws of physics that shimmer at their boundaries, sometimes agreeing, sometimes arguing, sometimes barely holding on. The transitions between these frames are not smooth but jittering, like the surface of boiling water seen through a magnifying glass, each bubble swelling and collapsing before you have time to notice. And yet, drift deeper, and you'll feel a strange softness, as though the universe is wrapped in layers of velvet darkness. There is no up or down, no distance or direction, only a kind of trembling that feels almost like breathing. Patterns shift and vanish before your mind can hold them, as if reality itself is shy, offering only glimpses of its true nature. At this scale, the fabric of space feels alive, pulsing faintly with possibility. Some physicists believe that this region is governed by quantum foam, a frothing sea of curvature and fluctuation, where space-time bends, twists, and breaks unpredictably. One moment, it might curl into tiny loops. The next, ripple outward and snap apart. These distortions are so small and so fast that they cancel out when viewed from any larger scale, creating the smooth universe we experience every day. But up close, it would feel like drifting through a storm of invisible waves. Still, this turbulence carries a quiet beauty. If you could see it, it might resemble moonlight scattered across restless water, shimmering and trembling in endless motion. But there is no water here, no moonlight, only fluctuations of geometry, invisible yet full of presence. It's a dance of motion at its most primitive, still untouched by the rules that govern atoms and stars. And perhaps this turbulence is where gravity itself is born, not as a force but as the curvature of space-time responding to every flicker. In this dance, gravity becomes a kind of memory, a long echo created by countless tiny tremors, rippling outward into the larger universe. What feels like the gentle pull of Earth beneath your feet might begin here, as the faintest quiver in an ocean too deep for light to touch. Yet even as you drift, a new sensation rises, an absence. It's the sense that you are approaching a limit, a threshold where the universe refuses to reveal more. Not out of secrecy, but out of fragility. This realm cannot be seen directly, even by the most powerful instruments. The energies required would collapse the very space you are trying to observe. You cannot measure the Planck realm without destroying it, and perhaps this is what makes it sacred. It is a boundary not meant to be crossed, a veil the universe draws gently across its own origins. Every theory about this realm is speculation, yet each carries a quiet hope. The hope that by understanding the smallest scale, we might glimpse the rules that shape all others. It is the dream of unifying physics into a single song. As you sink further, you might feel the world flatten into something like pure potential. There is no texture here, no stable shape, no familiar motion, only the raw possibility from which everything else emerges. It is like standing at the moment before a thought forms, when silence holds infinite meaning. In this silence, the universe gathers itself, preparing to become. Some researchers imagine that this realm holds the key to quantum gravity, the long-sought bridge between Einstein's smooth spacetime and the granularity of the quantum world. Here, the two might blend together, weaving a fabric that curves and fluctuates at once. If such a theory exists, it would be whispered in this darkness, encoded in tremors too faint to detect. But whispers can still be felt, and as you drift, the faint trembling beneath you begins to sound almost like a voice. Not in words, but in rhythm. It is the rhythm of becoming, the low murmur of reality assembling itself moment by moment. And you cannot help but wonder if the universe is not built out of particles and forces, but out of pulses, each one giving birth to the next. In this place, you might also sense something comforting, the realization that the universe does not begin or end abruptly. It unfolds gently, like a tide receding and returning, always in motion but never in haste. At the Planck scale, this unfolding is pure and fragile, untouched by the complexity of stars or galaxies. It is the universe's quietest whisper, yet there is also mystery. Some physicists speculate that space-time might not be fundamental at all, but emergent, arising from deeper processes we have not yet imagined. If that is true, then what you feel here is not the bottom of reality, but the surface of something deeper, something more silent, more subtle, more immense. And perhaps that's why this realm feels familiar in a strange way. It is the origin of structure, of motion, of time, yet it carries the same stillness you feel in moments of reflection when your breath slows and the world quiets around you, the same softness that surrounds a memory or a dream or a moment of clarity. It is the universe reduced to its gentlest form. The deeper you go, the less you feel like an observer, and the more you feel like part of the trembling itself. The boundary between self and cosmos begins to blur, not in a dramatic way, but in a slow dissolve, like ink drifting through water. You realize that the space you occupy and the space you observe are made of the same ripples, the same fleeting vibrations. And if you listen closely, closer than you have ever listened before, you might sense that each flicker carries a tiny echo of the universe's birth, a memory of its first expansion, encoded in vibrations smaller than atoms. Time and space may be vast, but their origin is delicate enough to slip through your fingers, and yet that delicacy holds everything you know. Still, the Planck realm does not offer answers. It offers presence. It invites you to dwell in a place where thought slows, where motion softens, where the smallest trembling carries infinite weight. It reminds you that reality is not rigid, but fluid, not fixed, but unfolding. That even the smallest vibration can ripple outward into galaxies. As you begin to rise again from this depth, the trembling softens, stretching into the smooth fabric of space-time you recognize. Shapes regain their form, directions reappear, and time resumes its steady drift. but you carry with you the memory of that fragile realm, where silence flickers, where boundaries dissolve, where the universe hums at its quietest frequency. And the question lingers in your mind like a warm ember. If the smallest scale of reality is trembling, uncertain, endlessly shifting, what does that say about everything built upon it? Perhaps that uncertainty is not a flaw, but a foundation, a reminder that even the grandest structures begin with a whisper. When you finally return to the familiar rhythm of your own breath, the universe feels wider, deeper, more intimate. Because now you have touched the place where reality trembles, and in that trembling, you felt something like truth. The deeper you slip into the terrain around the Planck length, the more you begin to sense that you've entered a place where reality no longer behaves like something built to be understood. It feels as if the universe loosens its organizing principles, letting them fall away like dust drifting from ancient stone. Shapes become hesitant, distances quiver, and even time loses the confidence with which it normally moves. It's not chaos, at least not in the violent sense, but rather a gentle unraveling, the soft shedding of structure, until all that remains is motion without direction. Physicists sometimes describe this realm through equations, diagrams, or simulations, but these tools break like fragile shells the moment you press too deep. The closer you approach the Planck scale, the more violently space-time fluctuates, bending into loops and folds with no consistent pattern. Gravity surges and relaxes in microscopic bursts. Quantum fields appear and vanish like sparks in cold air. What seems smooth and continuous at larger scales becomes jittering and restless here, like a violin string plucked infinitely fast. If you could see this, it might look like drifting through an ocean of translucent fabric, each sheet rippling and folding on itself faster than light could register. You might reach out, but your hand would pass through nothing, touching only the shimmer of probability. Even the notion of touch feels wrong here. Everything is too brief, too insubstantial, too uncertain. It's like trying to hold a shadow or grasp the outline of a dream before it evaporates with waking. And yet, there is an intimacy to this strangeness. It's hard to describe, but it feels as though the universe is showing you its unedited state, the version that existed before order crystallized, a version that remembers being untamed, unshaped, alive in its own restlessness. There is something strangely melancholic about it, like glimpsing a childhood photograph of a world that no longer exists. You sense a softness, a fragility, a tenderness you didn't expect. Some theories of quantum gravity suggest space-time here is built from networks or loops, tiny interconnected structures that constantly rearrange themselves. Instead of a smooth arena where events unfold, the universe becomes a kind of shimmering latticework, a web of connections forming and dissolving in rapid succession. Each node, each link, contributes to the geometry that will eventually grow into the space you experience every day. It's the universe assembling itself from the smallest possible pieces. Imagine looking at this lattice as though it were made of faint threads of light. They twist together, break apart, reconnect, and pulse with a rhythm that feels strangely alive. No single thread lasts long enough to understand, but their collective movement forms the illusion of stability at larger scales. This is how your world is built. Not from permanence, but from countless fleeting interactions repeating quickly enough to appear solid. If this sounds a bit like music, that's because in many ways it is. Some physicists believe that at the Planck length, particles are not objects but vibrations, notes played on the fabric of space-time. The universe becomes a vast instrument with its smallest strings oscillating at frequencies far beyond human perception. And the melody that emerges from this impossible orchestra. Everything you see, touch, love, fear. Everything you have ever known. But drift a little longer, and you begin to notice a new sensation, an eerie kind of stillness hidden beneath the trembling. It's as if, beneath all motion, there is an unmoving core, a quiet center holding everything together. This paradox, silence beneath vibration, echoes through the emptiness like a forgotten truth. You can feel it more than understand it, a soft gravitational pull toward meaning. Time becomes slippery here. Sometimes it seems to flow forward, other times backward, and sometimes it feels as though it holds its breath. The distinction between moments blurs. You might wonder if the future is already folded into the present, or if the past is unraveling into something new. In this realm, the arrow of time seems less like a command and more like a suggestion. And with that ambiguity, a subtle melancholy rises. Not sadness exactly, but a kind of cosmic wistfulness, the awareness that everything you know emerges from a foundation too fragile to touch. Your life, your memories, your breath. All of it depends on the jittering, flickering instability that defines this microscopic realm. The solidity you take for granted is built on a bed of trembling uncertainty. Some physicists describe this scale as the closest thing we have to the universe's nervous system, a place where information is exchanged, where forces are negotiated, where geography is negotiated moment by moment. If space-time were a living organism, this would be its most sensitive tissue, the place where signals originate. It is delicate, easily disturbed, and always in motion, and maybe that's why it feels emotional. Because something about this scale mirrors the parts of yourself that tremble too. Your doubts, your memories, your fleeting impulses. They are just as fragile, just as temporary, just as essential to your structure as these fluctuations are to the universe. When you look into the Planck realm, it is hard not to feel as though you are seeing a version of your own inner landscape. But the universe does not despair in this trembling. Instead, it builds upward, layer by layer, using uncertainty as its foundation. Quantum foam becomes particles, particles become atoms, atoms become stars, stars become galaxies, galaxies become the vast cosmic web. Everything grand is born from something small and restless. Everything stable arises from something unstable. Everything lasting emerges from something fleeting. This realization settles over you with a gentle weight, the kind that warms rather than burdens. You begin to understand that uncertainty is not the enemy of existence, but its engine. It is the quiet churning that gives rise to form, the trembling that gives rise to grace, the flicker that becomes the flame. As you linger in this realm a little longer, the fluctuations begin to feel almost familiar. They pulse with a rhythm that matches the softness of your own heartbeat. They churn with a frequency that resembles your own thoughts. They flicker like memories unfolding behind closed eyes. The border between you and the cosmos grows thinner, more permeable, more forgiving. Soon you no longer feel like an observer, but a participant in the trembling. You drift with it, sway with it, breathe with it. The Planck realm stops feeling frightening and becomes something like a cradle, a place where everything begins, including you. A place where the universe rehearses its own existence. And then, almost imperceptibly, something shifts. The flickering grows quieter. The trembling slows. The lattice of space-time begins to stretch, smoothing into the more familiar geometry of the world you know. Upward, the universe rebuilds its structure, layering order onto chaos, clarity onto uncertainty. When you finally emerge from this depth, you carry with you the echo of the trembling beneath reality, a memory of a place where everything is fragile, fleeting, and infinitely precious, a place where the universe whispers its softest truths. And perhaps, without realizing it, you have changed too. Because once you've seen how delicately the cosmos is woven, you cannot help but move through it more gently. The deeper you drift into the microscopic landscape of the Planck scale, the more you begin to sense a quiet sorrow woven into the fabric of reality. It isn't the sorrow of loss, but of impermanence, the soft ache of something too delicate to hold. Everything here flickers in and out of existence, never long enough to be called a thing, never consistent enough to be fully real. The universe seems to apologize for its own instability, as though it wishes it could offer something more solid, but knows it never truly can. Physicists call these fluctuations virtual particles, tiny blips of energy that appear and disappear within unimaginably short intervals. But the language feels too dry for what actually happens. It feels more like witnessing stars taking shallow breaths beneath an ocean of darkness. They shine for an instant, then fade before you can understand what they were. Their fleeting existence becomes strangely touching, like fireflies glowing in deep night with no one there to see them. As you drift closer, the flickering patterns begin to resemble thoughts, brief, electric, gone almost before they form. You start to wonder whether consciousness is built from the same kind of trembling. After all, memories appear and vanish. Emotions rise and break. Ideas flicker at the edges of your awareness. Perhaps the mind is not separate from this realm, but an echo of it, a macroscopic reflection of quantum impermanence. Time feels even stranger now. It doesn't flow so much as it pulses, expanding and contracting like the lungs of an invisible creature. Moments seem to overlap. The past brushes against the future. The present dissolves into something more fluid. You start to understand why some theories suggest time itself may not exist at this scale, that it may be a byproduct of larger structures emerging from this trembling foundation. If you close your metaphorical eyes, you can feel a strange warmth spreading across this landscape, like the fading glow of embers in a fire long extinguished. Nothing here lasts, but everything here matters. The universe does not seem ashamed of its fragility. Instead, it wears it like a quiet badge of honesty. It doesn't pretend to offer permanence. It only offers connection, moment to moment, flicker to flicker. There are mathematical attempts to describe this realm, string theory vibrations, loop quantum gravity networks, causal sets linking microscopic events like beads on an invisible thread. But none of them capture the emotional truth of being here. They don't express the humility of witnessing a universe built from pieces that barely exist long enough to be named. They don't capture the loneliness or the tenderness of this trembling. Drift a little deeper, and the trembling becomes a rhythm, soft, irregular, almost like a heartbeat. You can feel it inside your chest, as if your own pulse is syncing with the vibrations of spacetime. It is the first moment where the boundary between self and universe blurs into something softer. You are not observing the trembling. You are part of it, shaped by it, sustained by it. You begin to wonder, if the universe is built from such fragile things, how does anything hold together at all? How do galaxies form from this trembling? How does consciousness emerge from this softness? How does meaning rise from so much uncertainty? And yet it does, over and over again. Perhaps that's the quiet miracle. Stability does not require certainty. It requires repetition. As this thought settles over you, the trembling begins to seem less like chaos and more like the universe practicing existence, as if everything grand, stars, storms, galaxies, even love, begins as a small, uncertain flicker. Nothing is born confident. Everything begins fragile. That fragility is not a flaw. It is the starting point of all creation. The quantum foam around you swells and collapses, each fluctuation tiny and insignificant on its own, yet essential in building the macroscopic world. It becomes impossible not to feel compassion for these tiny bursts of energy, these miniature attempts at being. You want to reach out and comfort them, to tell them their brief existence matters. But then you realize they already know. Their role is written into the architecture of space-time. Now you start to notice something unexpected. Amidst the trembling, patterns begin to form. They aren't stable or permanent, but they repeat in ways that feel strangely familiar. It is like catching fragments of a melody carried on an unsteady wind. You recognize the structure, even if the notes keep dissolving. These patterns are the first whispers of order, the beginnings of the reality you know. And in that recognition, a kind of melancholy joy rises in your chest. Because you can finally see that the universe is not elegant because it is perfect. It is elegant because it is persistent. It builds beauty from unpredictability. It builds stability from trembling. And it builds meaning from impermanence. And in doing so, it reflects the inner landscapes of your own life more profoundly than you expected. You drift deeper into this realization, and the fluctuations around you start to resemble memories, some sharp, some blurred, some fleeting, some warm. They shimmer with the same delicate instability as the moments that shape you. The boundaries between cosmology and introspection blur, revealing something that feels almost sacred. The universe does not simply allow fragility, it requires it. You begin to understand that everything you've ever feared about uncertainty is actually the foundation of existence. Without fragility, nothing could change. Without impermanence, nothing could grow. Without trembling, nothing could come into being. The universe is not a monument of certainty. It is a garden of transforming possibilities. The flickering begins to slow, each pulse stretching into something slightly more stable. You feel as though you're rising through layers of meaning, emerging from an ocean of soft, trembling light. The melancholy remains, but now it feels comforting, like a warm hand resting gently on your shoulder, a reminder rather than a warning. As the Planck realm drifts beneath you, the geometry of space-time begins to gather itself into more recognizable shapes. The trembling recedes, the flickering dims. The uncertainty folds itself away like a blanket being smoothed over a sleeping child. And in its place emerges the first hint of structure, the earliest footprint of a universe learning how to stand. One final tremor passes through you, a kind of farewell from the realm of beginnings. It feels gentle, grateful, almost affectionate, as if this tiny corner of reality is wishing you well, hoping you carry some of its quiet truths back to the larger world. And slowly, softly, you rise toward the next layer of existence, changed in ways you can't yet name. When you finally look back, the trembling seems impossibly far away, like a fading memory or a half-remembered dream. But it remains inside you, woven into your understanding of the universe. Fragility is not the opposite of strength, it is the source of it. And to witness the trembling beneath reality is to witness the universe's most intimate truth. Everything that exists does so by choosing to rise again and again from a foundation that trembles. As you rise from the trembling depths of the Planck realm, the first sensation you notice is a soft thickening of space. The jittering instability fades into steadier pulses, as though the universe is catching its breath after an eternity of whispering. The transition is gentle, almost tender, like waking from a dream you're not entirely ready to leave. But something changes here, something subtle but profound. You begin to sense the earliest hints of structure forming from the flickering chaos below. Physicists sometimes describe this transition with mathematical language: renormalization, coarse graining, energy scales cascading upward. But such words feel too rigid for what you're witnessing. This isn't engineering. It's emergence. It's the universe learning to stand, balancing on trembling foundations until it finds enough stability to take its first step into existence. Each fluctuation threads itself into a larger rhythm, weaving patterns that begin to resemble something like geometry. The quantum foam no longer flickers randomly. It begins to sway with a shared motion, like blades of grass in a faint breeze. Tiny surges of probability align into clusters, each contributing to the formation of the earliest quantum fields. These fields aren't particles yet, just the rules that will eventually shape particles. It's like watching grammar appear before words, shoreline form before waves, breath gather before speech. As you drift upward, the fluctuations stretch into smoother behaviors. The fabric of space-time begins to feel less like a churning ocean and more like a soft, pliable sheet. It's still delicate, still restless, but it now holds itself together long enough for meaning to emerge. This is the threshold where uncertainty stops being the whole story and becomes the foundation of something greater. Imagine watching fog slowly condense into clouds, then into droplets, then into rain. That's what the universe is doing here, condensing itself from possibility into presence. The fields begin to settle into stable configurations, the electromagnetic field finding its symmetry, the Higgs field humming with the faint vibration that will give particles their mass, the gravitational field smoothing into the curvature that will make space navigable. These aren't objects yet. They are the moods of the universe, each contributing to the emotional tone reality will take. You drift closer to these fields, and they shimmer with a quiet warmth. They pulse with frequencies too delicate to measure, but your mind senses them as a kind of music, soft, slow, primordial. It's a composition that predates stars, planets, and galaxies. A song older than light itself. And yet, somehow, it feels familiar, as though every atom in your body has heard it before. Gradually, the fields interact, weaving together into a tapestry of forces. This is where the four fundamental interactions take shape: gravity, electromagnetism, the strong force, and the weak force. They don't appear with a jolt or a flash. They fade gently into clarity, like colors emerging from dim twilight. You sense them stabilizing the universe, giving it rule sets it can rely on. These forces become the grammar of existence, the constraints that make everything else possible. Within this tapestry, particles begin to form, not as objects, but as stable excitations of the fields. Where the fields vibrate steadily, particles appear like standing waves in a cosmic pond. Electrons, quarks, neutrinos, tiny footprints of geometry made tangible. You watch them rise from the trembling fabric like sparks catching on dry tinder, glowing with the first hint of permanence. These particles gather, drifting toward one another with subtle attractions. Quarks bind into protons and neutrons through the strong force, like tiny knots tying themselves into strands. Electrons dance around these strands, creating the first atoms, hydrogen, then helium, as the universe begins its long expansion. The simplicity is breathtaking. Before stars ignite, before galaxies swirl, before planets cool, everything begins with these quiet, persistent unions. You rise further, and stars begin to shimmer into existence, not yet burning but forming from clouds of primordial gas. Gravity pulls hydrogen and helium together in slow, graceful spirals. Over millions of years, pressure builds, temperatures rise, and the first nuclear fires ignite. These stars become the universe's glowing memory, carrying the fingerprints of the quantum realm in every beam of light they emit. The light from these early stars washes over you, soft and patient, as though telling a story in a language older than time. This light carries within it the imprint of the Planck fluctuations. Stretched across billions of years, into the cosmic microwave background. You feel it not just as warmth, but as a reminder. The universe remembers its trembling beginnings, even now. Galaxies begin forming, swirling like vast storms of stardust. Spiral arms wrap themselves around glowing cores, clusters gather into webs, and the large-scale structure of the universe emerges like frost patterns on a window pane. All of it, the stars, the galaxies, the cosmic web, treat the Planck realm not as chaos, but as a seed planted in uncertainty that grew into unimaginable beauty. From this vantage point, the universe feels impossibly grand, yet strangely delicate. Every galaxy you see, every star that burns, every atom in your body owes its existence to a realm so small it cannot be touched or observed directly. You are built from trembling. You are built from uncertainty, and still you endure. Still you rise. As you drift higher, the cosmic structures become more familiar. You recognize the Milky Way's gentle spiral, the glow of stellar nurseries, the quiet dignity of ancient stars nearing their final breaths. And somewhere deep within this galactic swirl is a small blue planet, fragile yet vibrant, carrying life that contemplates the very origins of existence. The transition is seamless, but profound. You are no longer descending into mystery, but ascending into familiarity. The universe becomes recognizable again. Distances stretch into landscapes, stars into constellations, atoms into breath. The trembling beneath reality recedes like a half-remembered dream. A soft melancholy lingers, though, an awareness of how delicate everything truly is. But that melancholy doesn't feel heavy. It feels honest, necessary. It reminds you that beauty is not born from certainty, but from the courage to emerge from trembling foundations. The universe didn't wait for stability before becoming magnificent. It grew anyway. As you rise through the final layers of cosmic structure, you begin to feel the quiet pull of home. Not a place, but an understanding. You see now that the universe is not built from strength alone. It is built from vulnerability, from uncertainty, from the willingness of tiny, trembling fluctuations to become something more. And when you finally surface into the familiar scale of human existence, you carry with you a new truth. Everything around you, from the stars above to the breath in your chest, is the triumph of fragile beginnings. The universe learned to stand on trembling legs, and so have you. As the journey back from the Planck realm begins, you feel the universe expanding around you again, gently stretching back into shapes that feel familiar. The trembling fabric smooths into flowing space-time, and the flickering foam becomes the quiet continuity you know as reality. Yet nothing feels quite the same. There is a softness to the world now, a sense of delicacy you hadn't noticed before. It's as if everything, every breath, every star, every thought carries the faint echo of the trembling foundation beneath it. You drift upward with the awareness that solidity is a gift, not a default. The structures of physics gather themselves around you like layers of warm light. Quantum fields hum with calm stability, their vibrations forming the particles that make up everything you touch. Gravity curves the space around you with gentle hands, guiding the paths of stars and planets. Even time flows in a steadier rhythm, no longer pulsing like it did in the depths below. You sense how miraculous this order truly is. The universe learned to calm its own chaos, to smooth its trembling into something that could hold galaxies, worlds, and life. As you rise further, the memories of the microscopic landscape become distant, but not forgotten. The flickering foam, the fragile loops of space-time, the trembling uncertainty, they linger in your mind like the final notes of a fading song. You realize now that the universe is not a rigid machine, but a fragile, persistent improvisation. Every law, every pattern, Every force that feels permanent is the result of countless tiny negotiations at the smallest scale. Reality is not imposed, it emerges, and somehow that makes it more beautiful. When you finally glimpse galaxies again, vast spirals of starlight drifting across darkness, they appear different than before. Their grandeur is unchanged, but their meaning has deepened. You see the symmetry of their arms, the soft glow of their cores, the elegant dance of their stars, and you carry the knowledge that all of it rises from trembling foundations. The cosmos is both enormous and impossibly delicate, a structure built from the smallest breaths of space-time. Stars begin to pass beneath you like lanterns floating on a dark ocean. Their light carries ancient memories, whispers of the early universe, traces of the first fluctuations, stories born from the Planck realm. They shine not with certainty, but with persistence. Every photon they release has traveled through a universe still shaped by the trembling you witnessed. You feel a quiet awe knowing that the very light reaching your eyes is part of that long, delicate lineage. As you near the galactic scale, the familiar patterns of the cosmos return. Stars clustering into families, nebulae drifting like cosmic clouds, galaxies weaving themselves into the vast cosmic web. Yet now, each structure feels personal. Each filament of stardust, each arc of gravity, each ripple of light carries meaning. The universe no longer feels like an external expanse, distant, cold, unreachable. It feels alive, sensitive, aware. Not consciously, but structurally. Its very architecture remembers its trembling origins, and so do you. Now Earth comes gently into view, a small blue world resting in a quiet corner of the Milky Way. You drift toward it with a newfound tenderness, seeing its oceans, its clouds, its continents as delicate fabric draped over a trembling foundation. Everything here is temporary and miraculous at once. Life blooms not despite uncertainty, but because of it. Your presence in this universe is not an accident. It is an emergence, a flowering of the same persistence that allowed space-time to stand on its trembling legs. As you descend toward your familiar world, the boundary between the cosmic and the personal blurs. You begin to see how your own life mirrors the universe's origins. You too are built from fleeting moments. You too have risen from uncertainty. You too have learned to stand on trembling foundations. The cosmos is not separate from you. It is echoed within you. The same softness, the same fragility, the same potential for beauty lives inside your thoughts, your breath, your quietest memories. And now, as the journey settles into stillness, gratitude rises like warm light in your chest. The universe may be vast, but the fact that you can reflect on its smallest foundations is a miracle unto itself. If this quiet exploration brought you even a moment of peace or wonder or gentleness tonight, I'm deeply grateful you spent this time here with me. These stories only exist because listeners like you keep returning to them. Before we drift apart for the night, I'd love to know something. Please tell me in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. These small fragments of your world, different countries, different nights, different seasons, create a kind of cosmic map of listeners drifting together. Your presence, your words, even your silence help shape this journey. And now, traveler, as your eyes grow heavy and the room around you softens, may you carry this truth with you. The universe is trembling at its core, yet it still creates galaxies and starlight and nights like this one. And you, built from the same trembling, are no less extraordinary. Tonight, let the cosmos hold you gently, as though you are a star returning to its quiet place in the sky.